Welcome to the fourth and final lecture regarding American institutions. In this lecture, I'll be dealing with the judicial branch of the federal government, that is mostly the Supreme Court. The objectives of this lecture are as follow. After listening to the videos, you should be able to explain the differences between state and federal courts, understand the role of the Supreme Court, and understand the place of the judicial branch within the system of checks and balances. But really, what I would like to teach you Hello and welcome to the fourth and final lecture about American institutions. There are several objectives to this lecture. Mostly, I would like you to understand how the Supreme Court came to play a major role in US politics. How the least important branch of the federal government has come to play such an important and political role. To do this, to answer this question, you should be able to understand the differences between state and federal courts, understand the role and composition of the Supreme Court, and finally understand its place in the system of checks and balances. As usual, I'll start with the building. This is the building in which the Supreme Court is housed. It's just behind the Capitol, the US Capitol. And this is the way we'll organize this lecture, starting with the difference between federal and state courts, having a long look at the Supreme Court, in particular the way it is composed, how members are nominated, and how the court works. Then we'll have a look at the importance of the Supreme Court, trying to explain it, and a more historical look at its role in the 20th century. And I'll have a final example in a separate video to try and sum up everything we've said about the system of checks and balances. The first point I'd like to discuss is the position between federal and state courts. Surprising as it may seem, there are two systems of justice in the United States. Not only two jurisdictions, but two parallel systems. As usual, you could say this is an example of the Federalist Compromise in the US government. But really what happened was that each state has a judicial system already in place. Criminals did not go unpunished before the existence of the federal government. So each state had its own system of justice, and another system was created on top of that with a specific jurisdiction. So two systems for historical reason, and the federal system of justice is really there for specific cases, not for general crimes. If you kill someone in Texas, you will be judged and tried in Texas, not in a federal court. So let me emphasize this. Most cases are judged in the states, at the state level, and only a certain number of them are examined in federal courts. In each state, you have courts of justice, then a court of appeal, or courts of appeal, plural, and then a Supreme Court. So a large number of state courts, a smaller number of courts of appeal, and one Supreme Court. And the states examine 95% of the cases in the United States. On top of this system of state laws, state judicial systems, the Constitution describes the federal system, and it describes the jurisdiction, that is, the territory, the limits of federal courts. What can federal courts do? Well, as usual, the federal courts deal with things which have to do with the United States as a whole, as opposed to local matters. There's a list, Article 3, Section 2. Cases affecting ambassadors, other ministers and consuls, admiralty, maritime jurisdiction, controversies to which the United States shall be a party. So if it concerns the Navy or the United States as a whole, that's part of the federal jurisdiction. Of course, if it has to do with the federal government, why would you judge the case in Texas or in Oklahoma? It wouldn't make sense. So you have courts for that. Controversies between two or more states. Controversies between a state and a citizen of another state. Controversies between citizens of different states. If you have a conflict between different states, where are you going to judge that? Well, you cannot judge it in one state, you cannot judge it in the other state, so you go to a federal court. And finally, between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states, and between the state or the citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens are subject. The US, the United States, and foreign countries, basically. So these are the three main domains in which federal courts intervene. The Navy and the United States, problem between the different states, and problem between the United States and other countries. And you recognize some of this because this is something we've encountered with Congress. There are also a certain number of specific cases, in particular bankruptcy law. It's a bit technical, so I won't go into that right now. Let me give you an example of the articulation between federal and state laws. Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh was an American terrorist, very much against the federal government. So he organized an attack on a federal building in Oklahoma on the 19th of April 1995. He killed 168 people. It was, of course, a major case and the largest terrorist attack in the United States before the 11th of September 2001. So, it's a crime which took place in Oklahoma, but it's a crime which affected federal employees. So, how did the two of them interact? Well, he was tried, indicted on 11 federal counts. Why? Because he had killed 8 federal officers. And there were all the other charges, but that was the main charge. He had killed 160 other people, but these people were residents of Oklahoma. So he could not be tried in a federal court for killing these people. He could only be tried for killing 8 federal officers, because that is part of the federal jurisdiction. The federal court found him guilty and sentenced him to death. And following that, because he was going to be put to death, the state of Oklahoma just dropped the charge for the other 160 deaths. So you have a case in which a person could have been tried in one case, in one jurisdiction or the other. And a compromise was found.